Hey guys, it's Danny, and in this video, I want to talk about 3 common misconceptions, or even borderline 3 different types of lies aspiring programmers tell themselves when it comes to learning how to code. And the reason why I feel so passionate about making a video like this is because I subscribe to a couple of these notions myself when I, a self-taught programmer, was going through my initial bootcamp phase of learning the Python programming language. You see, learning how to code was by far and away the best decision I ever made in my life. And just when I look at it right now and everything that it has afforded me to not only buy, but just overall the quality of life that I currently have, as opposed to when I didn't know how to code and I was stuck in a dead-end analyst job. It really is a night and day difference. So I want to address some of the misconceptions or lies that aspiring programmers often tell themselves when trying to learn a new programming language, because I don't think that the reasons you have for maintaining these ideas are valid. And I really just want to share with the world and all of you guys out there just how much this skill has changed my life overall. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, the first lie that I feel like many people out there tell themselves, and one that I told myself, was that I'm not smart enough to learn how to code. You see, I went to school, undergraduate college here in Chicago where I live, and I got a degree in mathematics. And pause right there. I know that probably sounds like, oh, well, this guy's an obvious genius. But honestly, like, believe me when I tell you guys, when I was in school going through all of my math courses, I did share quite a few courses with some computer science students, as there's a lot of overlap between math and specifically like calculus and proofs and reasoning and logic and computer science. So there were a lot of CS degree students in some of my courses, and I would just hear these like sort of horror stories of how these kids would have to have a project due at midnight and they had absolutely no idea how to even approach it, or in some cases they hadn't even started it. And it just left me in a place from hearing these stories of realizing, wow, these guys are in computer science and they are that smart and this is that tough for them. There is absolutely no way I would be able to even handle a fraction of their course load or the demands that these teachers are placing upon these students. And so as a result, I didn't take a single computer science course throughout my entire college career. Technically, you could argue maybe took one in my sort of curriculum at my school. It was labeled a mathematical computer science class, and that was the area of cryptography. So learning things like modular arithmetic, as well as like Euler-Totschen functions and things like that. Super cool from the math side. But there was really no sort of computer science coding involved. Like we had to crack, I think, like a Caesar cipher with a programming language, and that was it for like one homework assignment, right? So actually learning how to code in a language was just not something I did in college because of those reasons of me not feeling smart enough, just because of the stories and experiences that I saw and heard about from these other students. And so you might be asking yourself, well, when did you learn how to code? I learned how to code after college, actually. And after going through a couple of boot camps and reading up on some books and specifically how to code in Python, I realized not only did I have like a passion for it, but it kind of did actually come naturally to me, and not necessarily because I was like born with an engineering brain, although I do feel like my mind is sort of geared in that way in terms of the STEM fields. But as I was going through it, I could just remember thinking to myself, yeah, I probably could have done this in college if I was set up for success, right? If the professor just wasn't there for research and actually cared about their students, I probably could have done extremely well in it. And just looking back on it now, I can definitely say beyond a shadow of a doubt, I actually was smart enough to learn it. And not at all because I was already enrolled in math, but because the reality is, once you understand how to think like a programmer and once you understand all of the ins and outs that are involved in programming, it's not as complicated as you might think. And actually, what really helps you learn how to program is just by simply doing projects. And so, very much so, me being in a more abstract, pure math background, coding, I argue, would actually have been easier, because it's not like I'm trying to to create a proof for a LEET code problem, for example. No, I'm actually like applying what I know about a programming language and applying what I know about what's given to me in the problem to be able to come up with an actual concrete solution, right? Everything in computers is binary. You're either right or you're wrong. There's really no in between to reason. Now, how you get from point A to point B and how you get from wrong to right might be up to interpretation, right? There's plenty of different ways to implement programming solutions to problems, but at the end of the day, right, there is a right answer, there's a wrong answer. So it's not like you're trying to reason abstractly or philosophize about a computer program. And so with all of that being said, I would like to encourage you guys, if some of you out there are thinking about learning how to program but feel like you're not smart enough, give it a shot. Because if you're anything like me, I can guarantee you it's going to be easier than you originally thought. And you're going to kind of, I would say, surprise yourself at just what you are able to learn and what you are able to teach yourself if you just simply have the willpower and apply yourself to it. And so that's the first lie that I feel like a lot of aspiring students tell themselves. I mean, I was one of them, and I hope that just kind of addressing that argument head on, perhaps you can guys see now, and perhaps this is somewhat convincing that, okay, well, maybe I am actually smart enough. But the second reason and sort of the second barrier to entry that I feel a lot of aspiring students don't pursue a not only career in programming, but learning how to acquire a coding skill set is because they didn't go to school for it. Now, in our day and age in corporate America and the current sort of employment environment that we live in, possessing a degree is huge, right? You go on LinkedIn or any other job board website and you'll see that, minimum qualifications, bachelor's degree, preferred qualifications, master's degree. And so it's very obvious and patently obvious, I would argue, that corporate America does place a big priority or a big motivation behind possessing a degree. And so this is perhaps more of a valid concern than the previous lie that we just discussed about. But if you look at the sort of degree types that corporations are looking at for computer programming roles, it's not limited to just computer science. Oftentimes you'll see STEM field majors preferred, right? So even if you majored in biology or chemistry, if you majored in mathematics, if you majored in electrical engineering, for example, those are still very, very good degrees to possess if you're thinking about making a transition from your current career, or even perhaps if you're graduating with a degree that falls underneath one of those categories when you're deciding to make that jump into a computer science or software engineering role. So just because you didn't major in computer science shouldn't be a barrier to entry when you're considering applying or learning how to code in the first place, and then later on applying to software engineering jobs. Now, a perhaps more valid sort of situation where you might actually think this is true is, well, I didn't go to school at all. And while that definitely is a valid concern, I actually don't think it is as big of a problem as it might once have been, as it did with a lot of other things in the world. The pandemic, I really feel, exposed just the level of prestigious, status that we gave to institutions. I mean, I can remember looking through the internet during COVID, and I saw that even though Harvard was going completely asynchronous and completely online, they were still charging students full price tuitions. So they were still charging students, I believe at the time, something like 40 grand for a semester or for a year. At that point, I don't think it really matters, just to do school from their laptops. They're not even in the classroom. They're not even using campus facilities. They're not even in an environment where you might argue the $40,000 is worth it simply by being able to have access to a professor to answer your questions. And as a result, I feel like a lot of people who needed to be in an in-person environment struggled mightily. But I think for those who actually didn't need to do that, I think it showed them, as it did me, that they can learn on their own just fine. There's plenty of resources online, in addition to probably what you were taking at school at the time, to teach you literally anything you want to know. The information in online education space is absolutely huge. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's just continuing to grow over time, because people are realizing just how powerful of a resource the internet is, and they're leveraging that to teach themselves things that, like, in the 70s and 80s you most certainly could not have done because of just the lack of access to resources. Like, you had access to books, obviously, but not at the sort of probably catalog or to the extent that you have available to with the internet. And I just think overall, you can really teach yourself anything. Great example, honestly, is Elon Musk. I read his biography that came out about a year and a half ago. And regardless of what you think about him, I know he's a pretty divisive character at the moment. When he was first starting SpaceX, I believe he had to hire a chief engineer, someone who actually knew physics, or in rocket physics, rocket science for that matter, to be able to actually build these rockets he wanted to develop. And he actually got stuck in a scenario where the people who were qualified didn't want to do it because they thought he was crazy and they didn't want to embark on some losing journey. And the people who actually wanted to do it, they weren't qualified to do it because of just their lack of knowledge. And so it left Elon in a place where he said, okay, I mean, I think I'm actually probably the only one who's qualified to do this. And so as a result, he literally taught himself rocket science. You know, I know he went to college and I believe he majored in physics, so he had some of that background, but like, goodness gracious, like, rocket science is something absolutely crazy. But he was able to teach himself that. Now, he's one of the greatest minds of our time, so to be able to say you would be able to teach yourself programming to the depth and richness of knowledge that he was able to teach himself rocket science would not necessarily be accurate. But I think it is a good illustration of the fact that with the resources that are given to us currently, there's no limit on any topic or piece of field of study that you are limited to studying. So with all that being said, yes, not having a computer science degree can in some instances perhaps cost you a job compared to someone who does have a computer science degree. But there are so many jobs out there that simply by you not having a CS degree specifically, and I would even encourage those of you who actually have STEM degrees, like, they're one and the same. For all intents and purposes, a computer science degree is just as good as a math degree, which is just as good as an electrical engineering degree. You should not let that be a barrier to entry. But for those of you who did not go to school and perhaps went straight into the workforce and went straight into some kind of analyst job, or maybe like some kind of banking position, or shoot, maybe you're even a grocer or like a public utilities worker, just because you didn't go to school for that does not necessarily mean you are disqualified from these positions in tech, because you are absolutely able to teach yourself. Why else would companies like Coursera, Udemy, Free Code Camp be offering all of these different programs to people on the internet? Well, it's because they know that this skill in particular is something that works, and that there's going to be a demand for these workers moving forward. Now, this is actually a good transition to our third lie that I feel like is very relevant today, and a lot of people are telling and spewing and debating about within the tech sort of parlance circles, and that is, I don't want to learn how to program because my job will just be replaced by AI, right? With the advent of ChatGPT in 2022, and more recently the advent of DeepSeek just a few weeks ago, the question now is really coming to the surface of, are developers going to be needed going forward? I believe Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, on Joe Rogan's podcast said they plan to radically reduce their sort of entry-level / mid-tier level of engineers and replace them exclusively with AI. And so a lot of questions that I get from my YouTube videos in the past, which a lot of them are like this one, encouraging people to get into this industry, a lot of the questions I get are related to, well, is it even worth it? Like, am I just going to learn this skill set just to be laid off and replaced by a robot? Why not go into the trades or learn something that is not going to be able to be replaced by AI? And this one in particular is actually pretty valid, because to a certain extent, yes, AI is going to have an impact on this industry, but I think currently in 2025, I think it is still overblown the extent to which AI is going to impact the software engineering industry. You hear stories like Mark Zuckerberg's replacing people and engineers at Meta with AI. They're still quite a ways away from doing that. And it still leaves the question, who's going to train those AI models? Who is going to be the one to construct these artificial intelligence neural networks? You see, we're not at AGI just yet, artificial general intelligence, the ability for a computer program to actually reason and come up with new solutions on its own. That's not a thing yet. It probably is going to be coming within the next 5 to 10 years or so, but for the time being, we are not at that point. And so you're left with like two options. You could either stay in a job that you're sick of and make barely minimum wage, or you could actually take a leap of faith and learn a programming language, and more importantly, learn how to leverage AI to make you the most versatile engineer out there on the job market. And this is, I think, an important distinction to make, and an important sort of asterisk to apply here is, if you are learning how to code today, make sure you also know how to leverage AI in the right way. If you go and peruse through LinkedIn, you have a lot of software developers and recruiters out there right now trying to figure out, how do I assess the actual skill level of an applicant? Because ChatGPT has really kind of just, thrown a wrecking ball through the legacy style leak code interviews, because I can just look up any solution to a leak code problem on ChatGPT instantaneously, and I can memorize that even. And so there has to be, and there's a debate going on, that there has to be a better way to assess the ability for an applicant to actually think like a programmer instead of just simply looking up the answers. Now, that's not to say you should completely refrain from using AI in your work, because AI can actually be quite valuable. In my job, even we use GitHub Copilot, which is a phenomenal tool that helps you code very, very repetitive lines and blocks instantaneously, right? It sort of pre-fills, like if you ever typed anything in like a Microsoft Word document or a Google Doc, it's actually able to sort of predict what your next words might be based on what you have provided in thus far in the sentence up to that point. It's a similar thing with GitHub Copilot. It's going to fill in the blank lines of code that it knows you probably want to write based on the context of the code that is preceded it. Things like that are extremely valuable because it radically speeds up development time. And this is actually where I think the impact of AI is going to be seen and felt in the immediate. And it is a real impact, because I feel like now a team of 3 or 4 developers can probably output an almost equal and probably surpass the amount of work a legacy team of 4, 5, 6 developers were able to do, simply by being able to sort of speed up their development process by leveraging AI when it comes, especially in the area of unit tests. If you guys are interested in unit tests, I have a bunch of other videos on this channel. You guys can go ahead and take a look at them. But essentially, unit tests are ways for us to test our code to make sure it's accurate. And so they can be very repetitive when you're going to write them for whatever script you are creating. And so to be able to leverage AI in writing unit tests, I mean, that's probably like, honestly, for writing a computer program, probably a good 40% of your time is spent actually thinking of edge cases you want to test for. And so being able to leverage AI to help you develop that is going to be huge, and probably does arguably does replace the role of an extra developer. But that still doesn't negate the fact that developers need to exist, right? Just because a team of 3 or 4 is no longer a team of 4, 5, or 6 does not mean that those 3 or 4 don't exist, right? Those 3 or 4 roles need to be filled. So as a result, for those reasons, I still think learning how to program is going to be an extremely valuable skill set to have, and even going forward. I actually was watching a really good video the other day. I believe it was called something like, "Is it worth learning to code in 2025?" I'll link this guy's channel down in the description below of this video. But in essence, he argues that yes, just because AI is here and is going to be here for the foreseeable future is not necessarily a good reason to prohibit or put off your desire to learn how to code into the future, because developers are going to be needed now. And if you can get in on this AI boom and start to learn machine learning and AI research, man, you're going to be a very competitive candidate going forward in the job market. And so there you have it, you guys. 3 common misconceptions and borderline lies that I feel like aspiring programmers tell themselves when they're contemplating if it's worth it to learn how to code. The first one being they're not smart enough. As we've discussed from my own personal experience, I can testify that yes, I actually was smart enough. For goodness sakes, I'm a software engineer today, and I started out from square one, exactly where you guys are, and I was able to teach myself. So that was actually a shock to me. So yes, you are smart enough. Don't use that as an excuse to not learn, because at least hear me when I tell you, you can do it. The second reason is I didn't go to school for it. Well, similarly, I didn't go to school for computer science. While I did go to school for math, I still don't think that's a valid reason because of all the resources that are out there available on the internet and in the day and age of this information age, where access to resources like these, and even with the use of AI, you can really teach yourself anything. And I think you can teach yourself anything even quicker nowadays with AI. And so if you want to learn how to code, like, the world's your oyster, go for it. Everything you need to learn how to code is out there on the internet. And finally, this notion of AI is going to replace my job anyway, so why even bother? It's still not necessarily a good argument because developers are going to still be needed. Number one, to train these AI models, and number two, to understand the business use cases that they're creating programs for. You see, AI is great to sort of sanity check yourself, like if you want to figure out how to do something more efficiently, or if you want to understand really quickly like the documentation behind a certain function, like AI is phenomenal for that. But like as of now, AI cannot build you like an entire system with all the idiosyncratic sort of features that need to be present for a business solution. It can't do that. And so software engineers are still going to be needed. Now, like we discussed, maybe AI replaces one engineer on a team, maybe two, but the other two or three that are present are still going to be needed into the future. I think the BLS estimates that software engineers are supposed to grow at a rate of like 17% by 2033, and the average salary ain't too bad on there either. Again, learning how to code was the best decision I ever made in my life, and so I think it is a decision, and I would argue it is a decision you should make if you want to improve not only how much money you're making, but just overall your quality of life in general. And so that's going to do it for this one, you guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you did, smash that like button. Comment down below, what other lies do you feel like you maybe tell yourself, or other misconceptions you've heard of and don't know necessarily if they're true or not when it comes to learning how to program. If you guys are interested in learning how to program, and specifically in Python, I actually help coach students not only how to learn Python, but also how to land entry-level developer roles, and it's a very much mentor-led process. I'm going through the trenches with you one-on-one, really rolling up my sleeves and helping you one step at a time. If you guys are interested in maybe even working with me, go ahead and click the link down in the description below of this video, book a call, and we'll see if I might be able to help you. But that's going to do it for this video, you guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Later.